The sun-scorched desert stretched toward the horizon like a sea of golden waves as Xavier Harding rode his horse through the Nevada Territory in the summer of 1876. The 28-year-old cowboy's face was weathered beyond his years, testament to a life spent beneath the unforgiving western sun. He pulled the brim of his hat lower to shield his eyes from the glare, his thoughts drifting to the land waiting for him beyond the next ridge. 4,000 acres of possibility. His possibility. Almost there, Rusty, Xavier murmured to his chestnut quarter horse. Just a few more miles, and we'll see what all the fuss is about. The letter from his late uncle's attorney had arrived 3 weeks prior, bringing news that had changed Xavier's life forever. Uncle Jeremiah, his father's eccentric brother whom Xavier had met only twice, had left him his entire ranch in the Nevada Territory. Xavier had been working as a hired hand on a cattle operation in Colorado, earning barely enough to keep himself fed and his horse shoed. Now, he was a landowner, a man of means. As he crested the ridge, Xavier's breath caught in his throat. Below him sprawled the Diamond H Ranch, his ranch now, with its weathered but solid main house, barn, and outbuildings. A creek glittered like a silver ribbon through the property, and his cattle dotted the grasslands. For the first time in his hard Scrabble life, Xavier Harding had a place to call his own. When he reached the ranch yard, a grizzled man in his 60s stepped out of the barn. His face was as cracked and weathered as old leather, but his eyes were sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. "You must be Jeremiah's nephew," the man called out, walking toward Xavier with a slight limp. "I'm Frank Miller, ranch foreman, been expecting you." Xavier dismounted, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long ride. "Xavier Harding, pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller." "Just Frank will do," the older man said, extending a calloused hand. "Welcome to Diamond H. Your uncle ran a good operation here. 4,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and some of the best water rights in the territory." Xavier shook the foreman's hand, still trying to process that this was all his now. "My uncle and I weren't close. Don't know why he left it to me," Frank chuckled. "Jeremiah always said he was saving it for someone who'd appreciate it proper. Said his brother's boy had the Harding grit." He gestured toward the main house. "Come on in. Mrs. Peterson's kept the place up. She'll have supper waiting." Over the next week, Xavier settled into his new role as ranch owner. Frank proved invaluable, introducing him to the 3 ranch hands and showing him the operation. The men respected Frank and, by extension, gave Xavier the chance to prove himself. He worked alongside them from sunup to sundown, determined to learn everything about his new property. On his 8th day at Diamond H, Xavier rode into the nearby town of Silver Creek for supplies. Silver Creek wasn't much a single street with a general store, saloon, small hotel, blacksmith, and a few other businesses, but it was the closest civilization to his ranch. As he tied Rusty to the hitching post outside the general store, Xavier noticed a commotion further down the street. A small crowd had gathered outside the Silver Creek Gazette office. Curious, he decided to investigate after his errands. Inside the general store, Xavier handed his list to the proprietor, an amiable man named George Williams, who had already introduced himself during Xavier's first visit to town. "Getting settled in at the Diamond H, Mr. Harding?" George asked as he gathered the supplies. "Starting to," Xavier replied. "And please call me Xavier." "Your uncle was well respected around these parts. Big shoes to fill," Xavier nodded. "So I've heard." "Frank's been helping me get my bearings." "Good man, Frank Miller. Loyal to the bone." George paused while wrapping a package of coffee. "Heard you met the banker yet? Everett Stone's been eyeing the Diamond H for years. Tried to buy it from your uncle 6 times." Haven't had the pleasure, Xavier replied, his interest piqued. Well, you will soon enough. Stone owns half the businesses in town and has his sights set on the other half. George lowered his voice. Between you and me, I'd watch your back around him. Man doesn't take no for an answer. After settling his bill and arranging for the larger supplies to be delivered to the ranch, Xavier walked down to see what the commotion was about at the newspaper office. The crowd had thinned, but several people still stood outside, talking animatedly. "Excuse me," Xavier said, approaching a middle-aged man. "What's happening here?" The man looked at him with surprise. "You haven't heard. Old man Winters passed away last night, his daughter's taking over the paper. Winters ran the Gazette for 30 years, the man confirmed." Hart gave out finally. "Shame, really. Good man, fair reporter." Xavier's attention was drawn to the newspaper office door as it opened, and a young woman stepped out. She wore a simple gray dress, her honey-brown hair tied back in a practical bun. She looked tired but determined as she addressed the remaining townspeople. "The Silver Creek Gazette will continue publication as scheduled," she announced in a clear, confident voice. "My father would have wanted the news to go on without interruption. I appreciate your concerns, but I assure you, I am quite capable of managing the paper." One of the men in the crowd snorted. "No offense, Miss Winters, but running a newspaper isn't women's work. Your father should have taken on an apprentice." The woman's chin lifted slightly. "My father did take on an apprentice, Mr. Porter. I've been working alongside him for the past 8 years, writing half the articles you've been reading, though I doubt you noticed the H.L. Winters byline." Her voice remained steady, but Xavier could see the tension in her shoulders. "Still," another man chimed in, "it's not proper. You ought to sell to someone who can manage it proper-like." "I have no intention of selling," she replied firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an addition to prepare." She went back inside, closing the door firmly behind her. The crowd began to disperse, several men shaking their heads and muttering about stubborn women. Xavier found himself intrigued. He walked to the window of the Gazette and peered inside. The woman sat at a desk, her head bent over papers, a pencil moving quickly across the page. There was something compelling about her determination. Before he could think better of it, Xavier opened the door and stepped inside. A small bell announced his arrival, and the woman looked up, weariness evident in her eyes. "May I help you?" she asked, setting down her pencil. "I'm sorry about your father," Xavier said, removing his hat. A flicker of genuine grief passed across her face before she composed herself. "Thank you, Mr. Harding. Xavier Harding. I recently inherited the Diamond H Ranch from my uncle Jeremiah Harding." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Harding. Your uncle was a friend to this paper. He believed in honest reporting and the importance of an independent press." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Hope Winters. Well, Hope Livingston actually, but I use Winters for my byline." Xavier shook her hand, noting the ink stains on her fingers and the quiet strength in her grip. "So you're a journalist?" "I am," she replied, a hint of defiance in her tone. "Though as you may have overheard, not everyone believes a woman can or should be." "People have all sorts of ideas about what others can or can't do," Xavier said. "Doesn't make them right." The faintest smile touched her lips. "A progressive view, Mr. Harding. Just practical. My mother ran our farm for 3 years after my father died, until consumption took her too. Did a better job than he ever did, truth be told." Hope regarded him with new interest. "I'm sorry for your losses." She gestured to a chair. "Would you like to sit? I'd offer coffee, but I'm afraid I've been too busy to make any." Xavier remained standing. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd be interested in doing a story about the Diamond H. My uncle kept to himself, but I'm hoping to be more involved in the community." Hope's expression brightened. That would make an excellent feature for next week's edition. New blood in Silver Creek is always newsworthy, especially when it's someone taking over one of the largest ranches in the territory. I'm free whenever suits you, Xavier said, finding himself eager to learn more about this determined woman. Tomorrow afternoon, say around 2 o'clock. I could ride out to the Diamond H, see the operation. Xavier nodded. That would be fine. Ask for me or Frank Miller when you arrive. I know the way, Hope said. I interviewed your uncle last year about water rights in the territory. He was quite passionate about the subject. I look forward to hearing about it, Xavier replied. Until tomorrow, then, Miss Livingston. As he rode back to the ranch, Xavier found his thoughts returning to Hope Livingston. There was something about her, a quiet determination, an intelligence in her eyes that intrigued him. It had been a long time since a woman had caught his attention this way. The next day, Xavier found himself watching the road more often than necessary. Frank noticed and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. At precisely 2 o'clock, Hope arrived riding a dappled gray mare. She wore a practical riding skirt and a white blouse, her hair braided and pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Xavier walked out to meet her as she dismounted. Miss Livingston, welcome to Diamond H. Thank you for having me, Mr. Harding. She pulled a small leather-bound notebook and pencil from her saddlebag. I'm eager to see how you're settling in. For the next 2 hours, Xavier showed Hope around the ranch. She asked insightful questions about his plans for the property, jotting notes as they walked. She seemed genuinely interested in his ideas for expanding the herd and improving irrigation from the creek. When they reached the western pasture, Xavier paused, gesturing toward the mountains in the distance. My uncle's letter said this view was what made him buy the land in the first place. Said it reminded him there are bigger things than men in this world. Hope looked out at the vista, her expression softening. He told me something similar once. Said people spend too much time looking down at what they can take from the earth instead of looking up at what they can learn from it. She smiled at a memory. Your uncle was considered quite eccentric, but I found him wise. I wish I'd known him better, Xavier admitted. We only met twice, both times when I was younger. He spoke of you, Hope said, surprising him. Last year when I interviewed him. He mentioned his nephew, who was making his own way instead of waiting for handouts. He seemed proud of that. Xavier felt a warmth spread through his chest at the thought that his uncle had thought of him, had even spoken about him with pride. As the afternoon light began to fade, they returned to the main house. Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who came in 3 times a week, had left a pot of stew simmering on the stove. Would you care to stay for supper? Xavier asked, suddenly reluctant to see Hope leave. She hesitated. I should get back. I have tomorrow's edition to finish. All work and no food makes for poor writing, Xavier said with a smile. Besides, Mrs. Peterson always makes enough to feed an army. Hope relented. Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse? They ate at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between them. Hope told Xavier about growing up as the daughter of a newspaper man, learning to set type by the age of 9, and writing her first article at 12. Xavier shared stories of his years working on different ranches, the skills he'd picked up, and his dreams of having his own place someday, a dream that had unexpectedly come true. So what's next for the Diamond H? Hope asked as they finished their meal. Expansion, eventually, Xavier replied. But first, I need to understand what I have. Frank's been invaluable, but I want to know every inch of this place myself before making big changes. Hope nodded approvingly. A measured approach. Your uncle would approve. As darkness fell, Xavier insisted on escorting Hope back to town. They rode side by side, the moon providing ample light for the journey. When they reached the small house behind the Gazette office where Hope lived, Xavier dismounted to help her down from her mare. As his hands circled her waist, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, a spark of connection that left Xavier momentarily breathless. "Thank you for today," Hope said softly, stepping back. "It will make a fine article." "I look forward to reading it," Xavier replied, his voice rougher than he intended. Hope hesitated, then said, "There's something I should tell you, Mr. Harding. Everett Stone came by the office this morning. He asked demanded that I write an article suggesting that an inexperienced rancher taking over the Diamond H could destabilize the local cattle market." Xavier's brows furrowed. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I would write what I observed, nothing more or less." Her eyes met his directly. "The Silver Creek Gazette cannot be bought, Mr. Harding, not while I'm its editor." Xavier nodded slowly, his respect for her growing. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Miss Livingston." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made Xavier's heart skip a beat. "Good night, Mr. Harding." "Good night, Miss Livingston." As Xavier rode back to the ranch under the star-filled sky, he found himself already looking forward to their next meeting. The following week brought changes to Xavier's routine. He subscribed to the Silver Creek Gazette, reading Hope's article about the Diamond H with pleasure. She'd written fairly about his plans for the ranch, neither exaggerating his experience nor emphasizing his newcomer status. The piece concluded with a reminder that Jeremiah Harding had been a respected member of the community, who had built the Diamond H through hard work and innovation, suggesting his nephew came from the same sturdy stock. Xavier found himself riding into town more frequently than necessary, often timing his visits to coincide with the hours when the Gazette office was open. Sometimes, he brought news items he thought might interest Hope: a mountain lion sighting near the North Ridge, or the birth of twin calves, rare enough to be noteworthy. Each visit lengthened, their conversations expanding beyond ranch business or newspaper articles to books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see, and the small details of their daily lives. One afternoon in late August, Xavier entered the Gazette office to find Hope arguing with a well-dressed man whose back was to the door. The man's voice was controlled but laced with anger. "You're being unreasonable, Miss Livingston. Your father understood how things work in this town." "My father understood journalistic integrity, Mr. Stone," Hope replied, her voice steady despite the flush on her cheeks. "And so do I." Xavier cleared his throat and both turned to look at him. The well-dressed man was in his 40s, with cold gray eyes and a mouth that seemed perpetually downturned. "Mr. Harding," Hope said, her relief at the interruption evident. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Everett Stone, president of the Silver Creek Bank." "Mr. Stone, this is Xavier Harding, owner of the Diamond H Ranch." Stone's expression shifted to one of calculated interest. "Ah, Jeremiah's nephew, I've been meaning to pay you a visit." He extended his hand, which Xavier shook briefly. "Your uncle and I had many business discussions over the years. I'd be interested in continuing those with you." "Is that so?" Xavier replied neutrally, already disliking the man based on what he'd heard from George and now witnessed firsthand. "Indeed. The Diamond H has tremendous potential in the right hands." Stone's emphasis on the last words wasn't subtle. "Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner at my home this weekend. I have some proposals that might interest you." "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Stone, but I'm quite busy learning the ranch. Perhaps another time." Stone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. The offer stands." He turned back to Hope. "Consider what I said, Miss Livingston. The Gazette's future depends on making wise choices." With a nod to Xavier, he departed. Once the door closed behind him, Hope exhaled deeply. "Thank you for your timely arrival. Seems I interrupted something important," Xavier said, watching her closely. Hope moved to her desk, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "Mr. Stone believes the Gazette should be more accommodating to certain business interests in town, specifically his. And you disagree. A newspaper should report facts, not pander to power," she said firmly, looking up at him. "My father taught me that." Xavier nodded, his admiration for her growing. "What did he want you to write?" Hope hesitated, then said, "He wants an editorial supporting his proposal to dam Archer Creek for a new mill he's planning. It would divert water that several small farms rely on, but he claims the economic benefits outweigh their concerns." "And does it?" "Not for the families who would lose their livelihoods," Hope replied. "Not for the ranches downstream that would see reduced water flow, including, I might add, the Diamond H." Xavier's eyebrows rose. "That would affect my water rights." "It could," Hope confirmed. "Your uncle fought a similar proposal 2 years ago. That's partly why Stone was so eager to buy him out." Xavier processed this information, understanding better why George had warned him about Stone. "Seems I have some research to do on water rights in the territory. I have copies of the previous articles on the subject," Hope offered. "And the territorial statutes regarding water usage. You're welcome to borrow them." "I'd appreciate that," Xavier said. "Perhaps I could review them over dinner. There's a new restaurant at the hotel, I hear." Hope looked surprised, then pleased. "That sounds nice. I can't tonight, though. Tomorrow's edition needs to be set." "Tomorrow, then," Xavier suggested, trying to keep his tone casual despite the way his heart had accelerated. A smile spread across Hope's face. "Tomorrow would be fine. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up here," Xavier confirmed, unable to contain his own smile. The following evening, Xavier arrived at the Gazette office precisely at 7, wearing his best shirt and a freshly pressed pair of trousers. He'd even trimmed his beard and splashed on a small amount of the Bay Rum cologne he reserved for special occasions. Hope emerged from the back room wearing a dress of deep blue that accentuated her eyes. Her hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, with curls framing her face. She carried a leather satchel that presumably contained the documents she'd mentioned. "You look lovely," Xavier said, the words escaping before he could consider them. A blush colored Hope's cheeks. "Thank you. Shall we go?" The new restaurant at the Silver Creek Hotel was small but well appointed, with white tablecloths and a menu that offered more than the usual fare of a frontier establishment. Xavier and Hope were shown to a table near the window, where they could see the town's main street bathed in the golden light of sunset. Their conversation began with the water rights issue, Hope explaining the complex legal and practical aspects, while Xavier listened attentively. But as the meal progressed, they found themselves speaking of more personal matters: Hope's dreams for the Gazette, Xavier's plans to introduce new breeding stock to improve his herd, their shared love of raiding, and the unusual paths that had led them both to Silver Creek. "I never imagined owning a ranch," Xavier admitted as they lingered over coffee. "I was saving to buy a small spread someday, but nothing like the Diamond H. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all a dream." Hope smiled. "I understand that feeling. I always knew I'd work at the Gazette, but I thought I'd be writing alongside my father for many more years." A shadow crossed her face. "I miss him every day, but especially when I'm setting the press or making decisions about what stories to run." Impulsively, Xavier reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "He'd be proud of you, Hope. Standing up to men like Stone, running the paper with integrity, that's a legacy worth having." Hope's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she smiled and turned her hand to briefly squeeze his. "Thank you, Xavier." The simple touch and the use of his first name sent warmth through Xavier's chest. As they walked back to the Gazette office in the deepening twilight, their hands brushed several times until finally, Xavier took Hope's hand in his. She didn't pull away. At her door, Xavier hesitated, reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for the information about the water rights and for the company." "I enjoyed it," Hope said softly, looking up at him. "Both the discussion and the company." Xavier's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her mouth. Her lips were soft and warm, and she responded with a sweetness that made his heart race. When they parted, Hope's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, and Xavier thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Good night, Hope," he whispered. Her eyes opened, bright with emotion. "Good night, Xavier." As he rode back to the Diamond H that night, Xavier felt as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. The ranch, which had seemed like an unexpected gift of fortune, now felt like part of a larger design, one that had led him to Silver Creek and to Hope. Over the next several weeks, Xavier and Hope's courtship progressed steadily. They met for dinner twice more, and Xavier began escorting Hope to Sunday services at the small church in Silver Creek. They rode together on Saturday afternoons when the Gazette didn't publish, exploring the countryside around Silver Creek and talking for hours. Xavier found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he'd never expressed to anyone. Hope listened without judgment, offering insights that often surprised him with their wisdom. In turn, she confided her fears about running the newspaper alone, her determination to live up to her father's legacy, and her occasional loneliness in a town where many still viewed her as just Winter's daughter. By mid-September, most of Silver Creek had noticed their growing attachment. Frank and the ranch hands teased Xavier good-naturedly about his frequent trips to town. Mrs. Peterson began setting an extra place for supper on Sundays without being asked, knowing Hope would likely join them after church. Not everyone approved of their relationship, however. Everett Stone made his displeasure known through thinly veiled comments whenever he encountered Xavier in town. Several of the town's more traditional matrons whispered behind their hands when Hope and Xavier walked together, suggesting it wasn't proper for a young woman to be seen so frequently with a man without a formal engagement. One evening in late September, Xavier and Hope sat on the porch of the Diamond H main house, watching the sunset paint the western mountains in shades of gold and purple. Hope's head rested against Xavier's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I received another letter from Mr. Stone today," Hope said, breaking the comfortable silence. "He's offered to buy the Gazette again, double what he offered last month." Xavier tensed. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing I told him before. The Gazette isn't for sale." She sighed. "But he's becoming more insistent. He's convinced most of the merchants in town to pull their advertising." "Can you manage without it?" Hope straightened, looking at him directly. "For now, subscriptions are steady and I've cut costs where I can, but if it continues—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Xavier's jaw tightened. "Stone's trying to force you out. He wants control of the newspaper before the territorial governor visits next month. There's going to be a decision about the proposed railroad spur to Silver Creek, and Stone wants to make sure the reporting favors his interests." Hope's expression was determined. "I won't let him use the Gazette as his personal mouthpiece." Xavier admired her principles but worried about the consequences. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Hope smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You already do more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "There is something I've been meaning to ask you. The harvest dance is in 2 weeks. Would you escort me? The harvest dance was Silver Creek's biggest social event of the year. Attending together would be a public declaration of their relationship. I'd be honored, Xavier replied, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. Hope laughed, the sound warming Xavier's heart. That makes two of us. We can stumble through it together. The night of the harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool enough for the ladies to display their finest shawls and wraps, but not so cold as to make the journey to town uncomfortable. Xavier wore his best suit, purchased specifically for the occasion from the tailor in Carson City, a larger town 30 miles away. When he arrived to escort Hope, she took his breath away. She wore a dress of deep burgundy velvet with lace trim, her hair arranged in an elegant style with small autumn flowers woven through the braids. Around her neck was a simple gold locket, her mother's, she explained as Xavier complimented her appearance. The dance was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves, pumpkins, and bundles of wheat. A small band played lively tunes as couples circled the floor. Xavier and Hope danced several sets, laughing at their occasional missteps and enjoying the simple pleasure of being in each other's arms. During a break, as Hope chatted with the Reverend's wife, Xavier found himself at the punch bowl beside George Williams, the general store owner. "You and Miss Livingston make a fine couple," George commented, filling 2 cups with punch. Haven't seen her smile this much since before her father passed. Xavier felt a surge of pleasure at the observation. She's an extraordinary woman. That she is, George agreed. Brave, too, standing up to Stone the way she has. He lowered his voice. Watch your back, though. Stone doesn't like losing, and in his mind, he's lost twice to you now, first the Diamond H, and now Miss Livingston's attentions. Xavier's eyebrows rose. Stone was interested in Hope, George nodded. Has been since she came back from that girls' school back east. Her father wouldn't hear of it, knew what kind of man Stone is. Since James Winters died, Stone's been pressing his suit, thinking Hope would need financial security now that she's alone. This information put Stone's animosity in a new light. Before Xavier could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Everett Stone had arrived, escorting a young woman Xavier didn't recognize, the daughter of a wealthy mine owner from Carson City, according to George's whispered explanation. Stone's gaze swept the room, stopping when it reached Xavier and then moving to Hope, who had turned at the noise. A cold smile curved his lips as he led his companion toward them. "Miss Livingston," Stone said, his voice carrying in the sudden lull in conversation. "How lovely to see you. I wasn't sure you'd find time for social engagements given the challenges at the Gazette." Hope's spine straightened. "I believe in balancing work and pleasure, Mr. Stone. The Gazette is doing quite well, thank you for your concern." Stone's smile didn't waver. "Glad to hear it. I was just telling Miss Caldwell here about our charming little town." He turned to Xavier. "And Mr. Harding, I understand congratulations are in order. The word around town is that you've increased the Diamond H herd substantially." Xavier nodded cautiously. "We've had a good season." "Excellent. I always like to see local businesses thriving." Stone's tone shifted subtly. "Though I wonder if expansion might be premature. I've heard concerning reports about water access for the Diamond H come spring. With the proposed dam project moving forward, downstream rights might be reevaluated." The threat was thinly veiled. Xavier kept his expression neutral with effort. "I'm confident the Territorial Water Commission will uphold existing rights, Mr. Stone. After all, the Diamond H claims predate most others in the area." Stone's eyes hardened, though his smile remained fixed. Legal matters can be so complex, can't they? Well, enjoy the dance. He guided his companion away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Hope moved to Xavier's side, her hand finding his. "Don't let him worry you," she said quietly. "He's trying to unsettle you." "I know," Xavier replied, squeezing her hand, "but I think we need to take his threats seriously." Later that night, as Xavier escorted Hope home under a canopy of stars, their conversation returned to Stone's warning. "He's gotten to someone on the Water Commission," Hope said, her brow furrowed with concern. "I've heard rumors, but nothing I could substantiate enough to print." Xavier nodded grimly. "Frank mentioned that Stone's been buying up properties along Archer Creek. If he controls enough land with water access, he could challenge the existing rights structure." They reached Hope's door and she turned to face him, her expression troubled. "Xavier, if Stone succeeds in limiting the Diamond H-to-Kess water access, it could devastate the ranch." "I know," he said, drawing her into his arms, "but I won't let that happen. Your father's articles on the previous water dispute might help, and I've been corresponding with a lawyer in Carson City who specializes in water rights." Hope leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. "I'm sorry my reporting on the dam project has made Stone target you as well." Xavier tilted her chin up gently, meeting her worried gaze. "Don't apologize for doing what's right. That's one of the things I admire most about you." Their kiss was deeper this time, filled with the emotion that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Hope," Xavier said, his voice rough with feeling, "I love you." The words had been in his heart for some time, but this was the first time he'd spoken them aloud. Hope's eyes widened, then filled with a joy that made them shine in the moonlight. "I love you too, Xavier," she whispered, the words sending a wave of happiness through him. He kissed her again, pouring all his feelings into the embrace. When they separated, Xavier knew he needed to say more. "I don't want to rush you," he began, "but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. When the time is right, I hope to ask you a very important question." Hope's smile was radiant. "When that time comes, I hope to give you the answer you're looking for." The following weeks brought increasing tension in Silver Creek. Stone's influence with the territorial officials became more apparent as preparations for the governor's visit progressed. Hope's reporting on the water rights dispute and the proposed dam drew criticism from Stone's allies, who accused her of bias against progress. Xavier faced his own challenges at the Diamond H. A mysterious fire destroyed part of his northern fence line, allowing several dozen cattle to stray onto neighboring land. Though nothing could be proven, the timing seemed suspiciously convenient for Stone's arguments about Xavier's management capabilities. Despite these pressures, Xavier and Hope's relationship deepened. They began making plans for a future together, discussing how they might combine their lives, Hope continuing to run the Gazette while living at the Diamond H after they married. 2 days before the governor's scheduled arrival, Xavier rode into town to find the Gazette office locked during normal business hours. Concerned, he went to Hope's house behind the office. He found her sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers, her face pale with anger and distress. "Hope, what's happened?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Someone broke into the press room last night. They destroyed the type I'd set for tomorrow's edition, my article on the Water Commission hearing and the evidence of bribery I'd uncovered." Xavier's blood ran cold. "Were you here? Were you hurt?" "No, I was visiting Mrs. Peterson at the ranch. When I returned this morning, I found the damage." She gestured to the papers. "I'm trying to reconstruct the article from my notes, but the press, they damaged parts of it too. I don't know if I can get it working in time for the governor's visit." Xavier knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Do you have any idea who did this?" Hope's expression hardened. "I can't prove it, but who else would benefit from silencing the Gazette right now? Stone has everything to gain if the governor doesn't hear about the irregularities in the Water Commission's proceedings. Have you spoken to Sheriff Harris?" "Yes," Hope said with a sigh. "He took a report, but he seemed reluctant to investigate too deeply. Stone holds the mortgage on his ranch." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Hope squeezed his hands. "Just knowing you believe me helps. But unless we can get the press repaired by tomorrow night, there won't be an edition before the governor arrives." An idea formed in Xavier's mind. "What if we don't need the press? What if we distribute your article another way?" Hope looked skeptical. "How?" "Handwritten copies. We could recruit volunteers, people who have been hurt by Stone's manipulations or who believe in a free press. Each person copies the article several times, and we distribute them throughout town and at the governor's reception." Hope considered this, hope dawning in her eyes. It could work. It would be a lot of copying, but with enough help. "Let me talk to Frank and George Williams. They know who in town might be willing to help without Stone finding out." By that evening, a small but determined group had gathered in the back room of George's store after closing. Besides Xavier, Hope, Frank, and George, there were 7 others, farmers whose water access was threatened by the proposed dam, small business owners tired of Stone's manipulations, and the school teacher who had clashed with Stone over funding for the town school. Hope read her article aloud, detailing evidence that Stone had bribed 2 water commissioners and altered survey maps to strengthen his claim on water rights. The article included statements from farmers who had been pressured to sell their land and documentation of secret meetings between Stone and territorial officials. Through the night, the group worked by lamplight, making copy after copy of the article. By morning, they had produced over 100 handwritten versions, each signed with Hope's name and identified as a special edition of the Silver Creek Gazette. The governor's arrival the next day brought most of the town to the main street. As the official party made their way toward the town hall for the reception, Xavier, Frank, and the others moved through the crowd, discreetly distributing copies of Hope's article. Inside the town hall, Stone stood near the governor, speaking animatedly about the economic benefits his projects would bring to Silver Creek. He faltered mid-sentence when he noticed people in the crowd reading from sheets of paper, their expressions changing as they absorbed Hope's revelations. The governor, a shrewd politician who had risen through the ranks by avoiding scandal, noticed the disturbance. "What seems to be the matter?" he asked, taking one of the papers from a nearby attendee. Stone's face drained of color as he realized what was happening. His gaze found Hope, who stood at the back of the hall beside Xavier, her chin raised defiantly. The next few hours unfolded like a whirlwind. The governor, concerned about the allegations and unwilling to be associated with potential corruption, announced that he would delay any decisions on the Water Commission's recommendations pending a full investigation. Stone attempted to discredit Hope's article as a woman's hysterical inventions, but several of the farmers stepped forward to confirm her reporting. By the time the governor departed for Carson City the following day, taking copies of Hope's evidence with him, Stone's carefully constructed plans had begun to unravel. 2 of the water commissioners, fearing prosecution, came forward to admit they had accepted bribes. The territorial surveyor acknowledged that maps had been altered at Stone's direction. A week later, Xavier sat with Hope on the porch of the Diamond H, watching the sunset that had become their evening ritual. Hope's head rested against his shoulder, her hand entwined with his. "I received a letter from the Territorial Press Association today," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "They want to recognize the Gazette for outstanding journalistic integrity in the face of intimidation." Xavier smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Well deserved. You've saved not just the Diamond H water rights, but those of half the farmers in the county." "We did it together," Hope corrected him. "I couldn't have distributed those articles without you and the others." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, enjoying the brilliant colors streaking the western sky. Then Xavier shifted, turning to face Hope. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his heart pounding as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know we haven't known each other long in terms of time, but in all the ways that matter, I feel I've known you forever." Hope's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a ring with a single diamond set in gold. "Hope Livingston," Xavier continued, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You're brave, principled, intelligent, and kind. You make me want to be a better man. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Hope's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Xavier. Yes, I will marry you." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that conveyed all the love and promise he felt for their future together. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most of the town expressed delight, especially after Hope's role in exposing Stone's corruption had become widely known. The banker himself had departed for San Francisco shortly after the governor's investigation began, leaving his business interests in the hands of managers as rumors of criminal charges circulated. Not everyone approved of the match, however. Several of Xavier's neighboring ranchers expressed concern about his choice of bride. Hope was respected for her journalistic integrity, but many still believed a newspaper office was no place for a woman, much less the wife of one of the largest landowners in the territory. 2 weeks after their engagement, Xavier rode into town for supplies and stopped at the saloon for a quick meal. As he sat at a table, he overheard a conversation at the bar between two local ranchers, Caleb Jenkins and Timothy Walsh. "Harding's making a mistake with that Livingston woman," Jenkins said, his voice carrying easily in the half-empty establishment. "Newspaper gal with opinions on everything, she'll run roughshod over him and that ranch." Walsh nodded agreement. "Not to mention she's stirred up half the territory with that Stone business. Man needs a wife who knows her place, not some troublemaker with ink-stained fingers." Xavier's jaw tightened, but he kept his seat, not wanting to cause a scene. "Could have had his pick, too," Jenkins continued. "My Eliza says the Prescott girl from Carson City was sweet on him, pretty little thing with a good dowry and proper manners. They laughed when I chose her," Xavier said, his voice calm but carrying as he finally stood and approached the bar. Both men turned, startled to find him standing there. "But she's worth more than every acre I own." Jenkins had the grace to look embarrassed. "No offense meant, Harding, just talking is all." "Then find something else to talk about," Xavier replied evenly. "Hope Livingston is going to be my wife, and I won't have her name in your mouths." Walsh, less intimidated, snorted. "You're making a mistake, Harding. Woman like that will never be content as a rancher's wife." Xavier smiled slightly. "That's where you're wrong, Walsh. I'm not looking for a rancher's wife in the way you mean it. I'm looking for a partner. Hope is the smartest, bravest, most principled person I know. The Diamond H will be better for having her as its mistress." He placed money on the bar for his meal, then added, "And for the record, the Diamond H has prospered more in the 3 months since I took over than in the year before. That's not just because of my efforts, but because of Hope's counsel and support." So you can laugh all you want, but while you're stuck in the past, the Diamond H will be moving forward with both of us at the helm." Without waiting for a response, Xavier left the saloon. As he mounted Rusty, he saw Hope emerging from the Gazette office across the street. She waved when she spotted him, her smile brightening her entire face. Xavier crossed to her, dismounting and greeting her with a kiss that raised a few eyebrows from passers-by. "What was that for?" Hope asked, pleasantly surprised. "For being exactly who you are," Xavier replied, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am to have found you." Hope's expression softened. "I was thinking something similar earlier today. My father used to say that everything happens for a reason, even the painful things. If he hadn't passed away, if your uncle hadn't left you the ranch, we might never have met." Xavier nodded, taking her hand. "I think about that too. It's strange how life works sometimes." They walked together down the street, discussing their wedding plans. They had decided on a December ceremony just before Christmas, with a small reception at the Diamond H afterward. "Mrs. Peterson is already planning the menu," Xavier said as they reached the general store. "I think she's more excited about the wedding than we are," Hope laughed. "She told me yesterday that she's been praying for you to find a good woman since the day you arrived. Apparently, she didn't approve of your bachelor cooking habits." Inside the store, they found George arranging a new shipment of fabric. His face brightened when he saw them. "Just the couple I wanted to see," he said, gesturing them over. "New materials from back east. Thought Miss Hope might want to look at them for a wedding dress." Hope ran her fingers over the fine fabric silks and satins that rarely made their way to frontier towns like Silver Creek. "They're beautiful, George. How did you manage to get these?" "Ordered them special," George replied with a wink. "Can't have the Diamond H mistress getting married in ordinary calico now, can we?" As Hope examined the fabrics, Xavier pulled George aside. "I appreciate this, George. It means a lot to Hope." The storekeeper nodded. "She deserves it. Both of you do after what you've been through." He lowered his voice. "Heard about your encounter at the saloon. Jenkins came in red-faced about an hour ago buying peace offerings for his wife. I think you made your point." Xavier smiled. "Good. And thank you for standing with us during the stone business. I won't forget it." "Community has to stick together," George replied simply. Stone forgot that. He thought money could buy loyalty, but there are some things that aren't for sale. Hope selected a pearl-colored silk for her wedding dress, and they spent another pleasant hour choosing other supplies for the ranch. As they were preparing to leave, the door opened and Sheriff Harris entered, his expression serious. "Mr. Harding, Miss Livingston," he said, nodding to them. "Might I have a word?" They stepped to the side of the store, away from other customers. The sheriff removed his hat, turning it in his hands uncomfortably. "There's been a development regarding Everett Stone," he said in a low voice. "Federal marshals arrested him in San Francisco yesterday. Besides the water rights corruption, they've found evidence of land fraud and embezzlement from his own bank." Hope gasped softly. "Will he be brought back here for trial?" "That's still being determined," the sheriff replied. "But I thought you should know his attorneys have been making threats about both of you, claiming Miss Livingston's reporting was libel and that Mr. Harding orchestrated a conspiracy against him." Xavier's arm went protectively around Hope's waist. "Empty threats. The evidence speaks for itself." Sheriff Harris nodded. "Most likely. But Stone has friends in high places even now. Just watch yourselves for a while, especially when you're traveling between town and the ranch." After the sheriff departed, Xavier turned to Hope, concern etched on his face. "Perhaps you should stay at the Diamond H until this settles down. We could bring your things today." Hope shook her head firmly. I won't be driven from my home or my business by Stone's threats. Besides, the Gazette needs to report on his arrest. The people of Silver Creek deserve to know the truth." Xavier recognized the determination in her eyes and knew better than to argue. "At least let me escort you home each evening and check the office and your house." Hope agreed to this compromise, and they departed the store with their purchases, both sobered by the sheriff's warning but determined not to let fear dictate their lives. The weeks leading up to their December wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Hope continued to run the Gazette, reporting on Stone's legal troubles and the subsequent reorganization of the Silver Creek Bank under new management. Xavier worked with Frank to prepare the Diamond H for winter, ensuring adequate feed for the cattle and repairs to all buildings before the heavy snows arrived. Together, they planned their future. They decided that Hope would maintain the Gazette office in town, but would live at the ranch, riding in several days a week to manage the paper. Xavier had a small study in the main house converted into a home office for Hope, with a desk positioned to take advantage of the morning light she preferred for writing. 2 days before their wedding, Hope finished the last fitting of her wedding dress with the town seamstress. The pearl silk draped elegantly, the simple lines suited to Hope's slender figure and practical nature. She had chosen to wear her mother's lace veil and the gold locket that had been her daily companion since her father's death. As she left the seamstress's shop, the December twilight was already gathering, the air crisp with the promise of snow. Xavier had intended to escort her, but an issue with a pregnant mare had kept him at the ranch. Hope wrapped her woolen cloak tightly around herself and began the short walk to her house, her mind filled with happy thoughts of the upcoming ceremony. She didn't notice the figure lurking in the alley beside the newspaper office until it was too late. A hand clamped over her mouth and she was dragged into the shadows, her scream muffled by the gloved hand. "Miss Livingston," a harsh voice whispered in her ear. "Mr. Stone sends his regards." Hope struggled against her captor, managing to drive her elbow into his ribs. He grunted in pain but didn't release her. Another man appeared from deeper in the alley, his face obscured by a bandana. "Get her inside," the second man ordered, "and be quiet about it." They forced Hope through the back door of the Gazette office, which they had apparently broken open earlier. Inside, they bound her wrists and pushed her into a chair in the darkened press room. "What do you want?" Hope demanded, fear racing through her veins but determination keeping her voice steady. The taller of the two men lit a lamp, keeping it low. In its dim light, Hope could see they were strangers, not locals hired thugs, she guessed, sent by Stone from San Francisco. "We're here to deliver a message," the man said, placing a document on her desk. "Mr. Stone insists you sign this retraction, admitting you fabricated evidence against him." Hope stared at the paper, then back at her captors. "I will do no such thing. My reporting was accurate and substantiated." The shorter man grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "You don't seem to understand your situation, lady. You're going to sign, or that pretty wedding dress will go to waste." Despite her fear, Hope's resolve hardened. "Threatening me won't change the facts. Stone is guilty of everything I reported and more." The taller man sighed, as if disappointed by her resistance. "We were told you might be difficult. Mr. Stone suggested we might need to be persuasive." He withdrew a knife from his belt, the blade gleaming in the lamplight. "Perhaps if we leave you with a reminder of what happens to those who cross Everett Stone's say, a small scar on that pretty face, you'll reconsider." Hope's heart pounded, but she met his gaze steadily. "You can threaten me all you want. I won't sign a lie." Before the man could respond, the front door of the office crashed open. Xavier stood in the doorway, his expression murderous, a shotgun in his hands. Behind him were Frank and two of the ranch hands, similarly armed. "Step away from her," Xavier commanded, his voice deadly quiet. The taller intruder moved with surprising speed, grabbing Hope and pressing the knife to her throat. "Drop the guns, or she dies right now." Xavier didn't waver, keeping his shotgun aimed steadily. "You're not leaving this room alive if you harm her." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Hope could feel the blade against her skin, the slight pressure just short of breaking the surface. Then, making a swift decision, she drove her heel down hard on her captors in step while throwing her weight sideways. The sudden movement caused the knife to nick her neck, but it disrupted the man's balance enough for Xavier to act. The shotgun blast was deafening in the confined space. The taller intruder fell backward, wounded in the shoulder. The second man raised his hands in surrender as Frank, and the ranch hands surged forward to secure both attackers. Xavier rushed to Hope's side, his face pale with fear as he saw the thin line of blood on her neck. "Hope, are you hurt badly?" "It's just a scratch," she assured him, though her voice trembled with reaction now that the danger had passed. Xavier cut the ropes binding her wrists, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. Sheriff Harris arrived minutes later, alerted by the shotgun blast. The two intruders were taken into custody, and Hope gave a statement about their connection to Stone and the retraction they had tried to force her to sign. "We'll add attempted kidnapping and assault to Stone's charges," the sheriff promised, looking genuinely angry about what had happened. "These men will face territorial justice too." Later, after the doctor had properly cleaned and bandaged the small cut on Hope's neck, she and Xavier sat in her kitchen, both still shaken by the close call. "How did you know?" Hope asked, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that Xavier had insisted on preparing. "How did you know I was in danger?" Xavier took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her wrist where the ropes had left red marks. "I finished with the mare earlier than expected and came to escort you home. When I reached the seamstress's shop, she said you'd left 20 minutes before. I knew something was wrong." His voice roughened. "I've never been so frightened in my life, Hope." Hope leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I wasn't going to sign it, no matter what they did." "I know," Xavier said, a mixture of pride and residual fear in his voice. "That's who you are. But I'd rather have you alive and whole than prove a point, no matter how righteous." "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Hope said with a small smile. "The stubborn newspaper woman and the rancher who loves her." Xavier returned her smile, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Despite the harrowing experience, Hope insisted they proceed with the wedding as planned. "I won't let Stone or his thugs rob us of our happiness," she declared firmly. Xavier agreed, though he arranged for extra security at both the church and the Diamond H for the celebration. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white. The small church was filled to capacity with friends and well-wishers. George Williams stood beside Xavier as his best man, while the Reverend's wife had agreed to be Hope's matron of honor. When the church doors opened and Hope appeared in her pearl silk gown, a small bandage still visible on her neck beneath the locket, Xavier felt his heart swell with love and pride. She walked alone down the aisle, carrying a bouquet of winter evergreens and dried flowers. In her father's absence, she had chosen to make the journey to Xavier on her own terms, a fitting symbol of the independent spirit he so admired. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and support each other through whatever challenges life presented. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Hope with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. The celebration at the Diamond H afterward was joyous. Mrs. Peterson had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and the main house was decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Friends and neighbors offered toasts to the couple, many remarking on the unusual but perfect match between the rancher and the journalist. As the evening progressed, Xavier found a moment to pull Hope aside into the quiet of his now their study. "Happy, Mrs. Harding?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Hope's eyes shone with contentment as she looked up at him. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." Hope unwrapped it carefully to reveal a handsome leather-bound journal with her initials, HLH, embossed in gold on the cover. "For your thoughts that don't belong in the Gazette," Xavier explained. "Your private musings, your dreams, whatever you wish to remember but not share with all of Silver Creek." Hope traced the initials with her fingertip, tears welling in her eyes. "It's perfect, thank you." "There's something else," Xavier said, taking a folded document from the desk drawer. "This came yesterday, but with everything happening, I didn't have a chance to show you." Hope unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she read. "Xavier, this says you've made me co-owner of the Diamond H." He nodded, suddenly nervous about her reaction. "I want us to be true partners, Hope. In everything. The ranch is as much yours now as it is mine." Hope was speechless for a moment, overcome with emotion. Then she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a passion that left no doubt about her feelings on the matter. "I love you, Xavier Harding," she whispered when they finally parted, "and I promise to be the best partner you could ask for." "I never doubted it for a moment," Xavier replied, holding her close. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the last guests departed, leaving Xavier and Hope alone in their home. As they stood on the porch watching the final wagon disappear down the snow-covered road, Xavier put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Remember the first time we stood here watching the sunset?" he asked. Hope nodded, leaning into him. "I was already falling in love with you, though I wasn't ready to admit it yet." "So was I," Xavier confessed. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing up to those men outside the Gazette, refusing to be intimidated." Hope smiled at the memory. "And I fell for you when you said you believed in me when so many others didn't." Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "They laughed when I chose you," he said softly, echoing his words from the saloon confrontation. "But you're worth more than every acre I own. And you're worth more than every word I've ever written or will write," Hope replied, her eyes reflecting the love she felt. They sealed this declaration with a kiss, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above the Diamond H, their home, their future, the beginning of their life together. Spring came early to the Nevada territory in 1877. By March, the snow had retreated from the Diamond H pastures, and green shoots were emerging from the soil. The creek ran high with snowmelt, promising a good water year for the ranch and its neighbors. Xavier and Hope had settled into a rhythm that balanced both their interests. Hope rode into town 3 days a week to manage the Gazette, which was thriving under her leadership. The paper's reputation had grown throughout the territory following the Stone Exposé, and subscription rates had nearly doubled. At the ranch, Hope had proven herself as capable with the business ledgers as she was with newspaper articles. Her organizational skills and sharp mind had already identified several ways to improve the Diamond H-Teque's profitability. Xavier had implemented her suggestions without hesitation, trusting her judgment implicitly. Their partnership extended to all aspects of ranch life. While Xavier managed the day-to-day operations with Frank's continued assistance, Hope had taken particular interest in the breeding program, researching bloodlines and corresponding with successful breeders back east. They made all major decisions together, often discussing ranch business in the evenings as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a tradition they had maintained since their courtship. News had reached Silver Creek in February that Everett Stone had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 10 years in a federal prison. His assets in the territory had been liquidated, with restitution paid to those who had suffered from his schemes. The Water Commission had been reorganized, with new members committed to fair distribution of resources. The Diamond H water rights were now secure, as were those of the smaller farms that had been threatened by Stone's dam project. On a warm April morning, Xavier and Hope rode out together to inspect the northern boundary of the ranch. The wildflowers were beginning to bloom, painting the landscape with splashes of purple, yellow, and white. They stopped to rest the horses near a particularly beautiful meadow, spreading a blanket for an impromptu picnic lunch. As they sat together enjoying the peaceful scene, Hope reached for Xavier's hand, her expression both nervous and excited. "I have some news," she said, her voice soft but steady. Xavier looked at her curiously. "Good news, I hope." Hope's smile was radiant as she placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "The best news. We're going to have a baby, Xavier, in October, according to Dr. Wilson." Xavier stared at her in wonder, his heart swelling with a joy so intense it was almost painful. "A baby, we're going to be parents," Hope nodded, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. "Are you pleased?" In answer, Xavier gathered her in his arms, kissing her with all the love and elation he felt. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Please doesn't begin to describe it," he whispered. "I love you so much, Hope Harding." "And I love you," she replied, her eyes shining with the promise of their future together. "I can't wait to see you as a father." Xavier placed his hand on her stomach again, marveling at the miracle growing within. "Boy or girl, this child will be so loved. And they'll have the strongest, smartest, most amazing mother in the Nevada territory. And the most devoted, honorable father," Hope added, covering his hand with hers. They stayed in the meadow for hours, making plans and dreaming of the future, their child growing up on the Diamond H, learning to ride and raid, absorbing values from both parents. Xavier insisted that Hope would continue running the Gazette for as long as she wished, promising to support her career alongside their family life. "Our child will be proud to have a mother who stands up for truth and justice," he declared. "Just as I am." When they finally rode back to the ranch house, the setting sun gilding the landscape in golden light, Xavier felt a profound sense of contentment. The Diamond H had been an unexpected gift, but the true treasure was the woman riding beside him and the child they would welcome in the autumn. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Xavier held Hope close, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. "You know," he murmured against her hair, "when I first arrived at the Diamond H, I thought the land was the most valuable thing I'd ever possess. 4,000 acres seemed like unimaginable wealth to a man who'd owned nothing his whole life." Hope turned in his arms to face him, her expression tender in the moonlight streaming through the window. "And now," Xavier traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers, "now I know better. You and our child, you're worth more than every acre I own, every cow, every building, every drop of water in the creek. If I lost everything else tomorrow but still had you both, I'd count myself the richest man in the territory." Hope's eyes filled with tears as she leaned forward to kiss him softly. "I feel the same way. The Gazette was my father's legacy and I cherish it. But what we've built together, our marriage, our home, our coming child, that's the true wealth in my life." 6 months later, on a crisp October evening with the aspens turned to gold on the mountainsides, Hope gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth James Harding, Elizabeth for Xavier's mother and James for Hope's father. She had Xavier's dark hair and Hope's bright blue eyes, and from her first lusty cry, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. As Xavier held his daughter for the first time, watching Hope's exhausted but radiant face, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice in every sense. Whatever challenges came their way in life on the frontier, ensured there would be many, they would face them together, as equal partners, as devoted parents, as a family built on love and respect. When Elizabeth was 3 weeks old, Xavier carried her onto the porch at sunset, Hope following with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. Together, they showed their daughter the land that would be her heritage, the rolling pastures of the Diamond H stretching toward the mountains. "Your mother and I have great hopes for you, little one," Xavier whispered to the infant nestled in his arms. "You'll grow up knowing that you can be anything you set your mind to. You'll learn about cattle and printing presses, about words and land and water. You'll know that your worth comes not from what others think of you, but from what you believe about yourself." Hope leaned against his shoulder, adding softly, "And you'll know that you were born from a love that defied expectations, a love worth more than acres or words or gold." As the sun sank below the western mountains, casting its final golden light across the Diamond H, Xavier and Hope stood together with their daughter, their hearts full with the rich promise of the life they had created together.